Welcome, everyone, to this latest edition, this podcast from the Evolving Sisters Network. I am Kenlyn Colleen, and I have a really special guest, someone very warm to my heart because we've been working together for several years, and this is Clare Dash. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you. Hello.
So Clare Dash is going to talk to us today about trauma. Now, I know that that's a huge word in the zeitgeist these days. Everybody is doing trauma summits and we're talking about trauma, which is probably incredible for our lifetime. And so I wanted to bring Clare Dash here. We've been working together to prepare her course called Transforming Trauma. She is a heart-centered healer. She's been in my Divine Feminine community, in my Evolving Sisters community. And I felt like there was a particular way that spiritually awakened women get to look at trauma. I mean, you know, in our life right now, we are taking up the carpet, looking underneath, and really saying as awakened women that the buck stops here, that we're going to do our work so that others can live more free and more in their genius than we've ever had before. So welcome, Clare. That's a long way of saying that we're talking about trauma today. But I'm so grateful for you. And let's start off presencing a little bit of your background so we can create the listening. Why would we listen to Clare today about trauma?
Yeah, I've been a therapist for 28 years, and I was an art therapist to start with. And I think art therapy really appealed to me because I love working with the unconscious and I love going deep. It's a deep, slow process that often you don't really understand the effects of until maybe 6 months after you've finished art therapy treatments. And I was finding that was a bit slow for the kind of services that I was working for. So I trained in trauma treatments and it blew my mind. It made me see everything that was coming through in the client's problems as trauma. So when someone was coming with depression or anxiety or eating disorder or post-traumatic stress, I didn't need those labels anymore because I just saw a person in front of me who was traumatized. They were an individual and their story was what we needed to find out. So I stopped doing the full assessments. I didn't need to know all the story of their mental health. I just needed to know how they were feeling now and then understand that that's a result of trauma that they've experienced. And so we could unpack it individually like that. And my results tripled. It was really amazing.
Wow, I have full chills listening to this because it feels like it's so opposite the medical model that wants to pigeonhole people and label them, and then they carry the burden of this label. So what an incredible discovery. So let's start off by defining trauma. What would you say trauma is?
So most people think that trauma is an event. Someone's house burnt down. Oh, you must have had trauma. But it depends on that individual. Trauma is when we didn't have the resources to cope, when we didn't have the support, when we didn't have a previous experience that helped us understand that, when it was sudden, dramatic, or unexpected. So particularly when you're thinking of a child under the age of 7, when we're about 7, our cognitive thinking and ability starts to come on board. Prior to that, we're relying on things that aren't to do with thinking, and it's more instinctive and reflexive behavior. So if you have an event or a series of events before that time, you're going to need an adult who can make it safe for you, who can help you understand what's going on and why, give you hope and know that you'll get through it, it'll be better. If that's you falling off the swing in the playground or your house burning down, if you have that right adult there who can give you those pieces, then it's not going to be trauma because you're processing it. But if you don't have that resource because it's not inside you or it's not given by an adult, you're not going to process that trauma. And quite likely, you're going to do what the adult's doing, which is put it under the carpet, which is not deal with it and leave it unprocessed. But it doesn't go away because it stays in our body, either as a belief system or as a fight or flight response. So we might end up sort of building beliefs around our traumas that make us feel like we can't be vulnerable, or we're not good enough, or that we'll never be loved. And these can come out of a simple trauma like falling off a swing. So people used to think that trauma was big and you had to understand, well, that's definitely trauma. Mm-hmm. But now we're realizing it's not the event. Trauma is what happens to you as a result of an event, and it wasn't processed. So it's the residual in you now from not having processed it.
And does that only apply to the ages of 0 to 7, or can we experience trauma even after that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. We can experience trauma at any time when we don't have that support. So someone might be going through a divorce as an adult and they don't have support around that, or moving house, or whatever it is. It could be an explosion. If you're not given the resources, it's dramatic and you don't have the resources inside. I tell my clients this really simple example. Imagine you're driving along a road and you see something about to run in front of the car. What's happening is information's going into your frontal cortex and you go, danger. So it goes from there in a very simplistic way to our amygdala and our hippocampus. And our amygdala lights up with the fight or flight response. It's deep inside our limbic part of our brain, and it gets us ready to put the foot on the pedal. Something's going to run in front of the car, danger. At the same time, information's going to our hippocampus. And the hippocampus, I think of like a filing cabinet, and we're rifling through there going, have I had this experience before? And we find the card that says, yep, that's a black plastic bag tied to the fence that we drove past last week. And your foot doesn't touch the brake. So what happens when we do that? That's a traumatic event. Something was about to run in front of the car, but we processed it. And we processed it by using our knowledge, our resources, that it's happened before. We don't even need to look. We keep driving. We don't go home and say we had a trauma. But if it hadn't been something that we had experienced before, we would remain looking. This is a very simplistic way. Looking, the hippocampus would remain kind of on alert in connection with our fight or flight. So if we haven't had the resources, we don't have that file in the cabinet that says, I know what to do.
Thank you for that. So let's talk about the repercussions of trauma, because I think that's why this conversation has caught fire in the zeitgeist, in the collective consciousness. We are looking at our actions and the actions of others and our societal actions, and we're unearthing that we have been a species that has been in trauma. And as a result, we're doing certain things. And in this context, we're talking to the awakened woman. So the person who's been on a spiritual path. And I found when you were speaking and creating the course and we were going back and forth, it was enlightening to me to realize that many symptoms that we just brush away or we overlook or we numb out about are actually what you would consider as symptoms of trauma. So let's use it that context, because I think that that's the population that will be listening to this podcast and wanting to take some next steps with you, Clare.
Yeah, I think a lot of the symptoms that we're talking about, like insomnia, like not being able to speak up at a work meeting, things that we say, oh, just live with that, or that's just who I am and I just don't sleep well, or I don't have the confidence to speak up at work. But when the work I've done, when I look with my clients underneath what's going on, is there's a story in there that has a belief system. And that belief system can often go way, way, way back. So it might be I can't sleep at night because when it's at nighttime, I can start to think all the thoughts that I haven't thought about. And that could be a fear state. It could be something we don't really have a handle for because we've been used to it. Our neural networks have set that up for such a long time that we're used to just feeling this level of anxiety that we can't shut down because a part of us is feeling afraid. I know that in myself, not with insomnia, but that I had this an unconscious sort of fear state. And when I started noticing it in my body, I could feel the sort of shaking and the terror. And I related that back to my childhood experiences and was able to overcome it. I think what really strikes me about what's going on today for the awakened woman is that we're told, okay, that you have this belief system, just now you're aware of it. Now you know that it's there, make it go away. So you're now aware that you have a confidence issue or that you feel scarcity. Great. Now just affirmate it away with affirmations. And to me, that's not enough. For some people, that's good. It's okay. But for most people, we have a belief system that's unhelpful because of our trauma. And it may go back to something like my parents didn't respect me, or it was not safe to be seen as me growing up. And that belief system stems in a time when we're actually felt in danger. And unless you can deal with that dysregulation that's kind of bubbling around underneath, which is trauma response, affirmations are not going to make you speak up at work.
Yeah, it sounds like affirmations would be really helpful after you've done that work. Yes. To retrain your neural net from going into that direction.
Yeah. And people think they fail. I tried all the affirmation and it didn't work. So it's about listening to whether you're regulated or not regulated. And that takes time. And you need to be able to understand what triggers you, what's making you feel dysregulated, what that feels like for you, and how you can calm your body and bring that back. And there are ways that you can do by coming back into your body that can bring that up. And then you can do the trauma work.
Yeah, so let's talk about some subtlety, because I think that's the level that women who have done a lot of work on themselves, or maybe those entering into the spiritual path and had an awakening experience or an aha moment that caught them looking inward. So if we look at subtlety, one of the subtleties that you already brought out was this idea of sleep, like brushing over that I can't sleep. For me, it's come in the form of anxiety, and particularly, like I would say, taking on projects that I didn't know that I could do and feeling an immense amount of fear around it. Are there other ways of just subtle ways that this trauma comes up that if someone listening could really start to look inward for those symptoms?
Such a broad range of symptoms. If you're thinking about sleep, for instance, which is a big one, I've found that most people who have problems with sleep, it's parts of themselves that are waking up at night and trying to protect the system, the body. So we can cope during the day because maybe more competent parts of us step in front and be the competent parent, person going to work. We can, manage everything. And then at night, other parts can come forward and go, but what if? So there's also been some sleep studies which show that when we go into REM sleep, the first couple of hours of the night are going to be processed by what's happened in the last few days or the last day. And then if they wake people up in these sleep studies after in the sort of second or third wave of REM sleep, they're thinking about things that happened last year or the last 5 years. And then if it's in the final wave sleep, maybe before we wake up in those first sort of 3 hours of the morning, It's what happened in our childhood that's unprocessed. So there's a process going on in our brains that we can understand by what time of night we wake up and how your sleep is. But I personally find that when we can understand parts of ourselves are really processing something, and often it's fear, that's what's keeping people up. And when we can recognize that we just need to soothe and calm ourselves and remind ourselves it's going to be okay, we can train ourselves to go back to sleep. But it is a complex thing.
Well, I love that you said that. There's so much here. I want to talk about the embodiment, and I want to talk about the training that, and so let's placeholder that. And I want to just a little bit more unpacking on some of the subtleties. I love that sleep analogy. One of the other ones that I remember hearing you talk about was about our voice and speaking. And when you go kind of blank, when someone asks you a question and you go blank, is that, or can that be a trauma response?
For sure. I would say for sure. What's happening in our brains all the time is that we're working from our cortex, which is our human brain, but we're also working from our mammalian and our reptilian brain, which is the limbic system. That's where our fight and flight response is, and our more primitive reactive comes from. So if we're in a situation where we feel under threat, we may not really recognize it. So the boss has said to you, I want you to take over the meeting, I've got an emergency, and leaves the room. And you've been okay up until then, and suddenly that feels like a threat. Your thinking ability goes offline and you go into a primitive response or a fight and flight response. And so you can't think what to say next, what to do, because your thinking brain's actually gone offline. And what that means is that you've gone into a fight or flight or freeze response.
Yeah, I think the fight, flight, or freeze are now, they've also entered into the collective consciousness, and we're becoming more aware of that fight, flight, or freeze. Is that fight where we get triggered, when we say we're triggered and then we argue and lash out? Is that where trigger comes into play, in other words?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's certainly one example of it. Yeah. Trigger just means that our stuff gets activated, the unprocessed trauma.
And then we can respond to it either in one of those categories.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it means that we're dysregulated. We're not in a regulated place.
Okay. And each of us has a pattern, I suspect, of how we respond. So some people's are fight, some people's are flight. Why don't you go through those four, with three, and then we add fawn to it. Let's add fawn to that, just to round out the ways in which we have been patterned to respond to that dysregulation.
It's not so much that we've been patterned, it's our human instinct. This is if you think of a turtle, it's sitting by the lake and a branch drops on its head. It's going to pull its head in. It's not going to put the head up and go, well, is it safe to stay here? Is another branch going to fall? It's just going to react. That's our reptilian brain, our primitive response. We just react. We're not thinking or processing anything. But if it's a rabbit sitting there with a mammalian brain, they're going to be maybe not running away. They'll just move back a little bit. Or they'll look at the other rabbits. Is it safe to stay here? What was all that about? So there's some communication and some emotion going on. But again, it's not thinking. But if it's us sitting there, we'll look up and go, oh, is that branch safe to sit under? Is another branch going to fall down? So you can see that there's these different levels of our brain. So when we go into a fight or flight response, we've gone to the mammalian or the reptilian response where it's not thought about. So if you're in a child, a very young infant, say, who can't walk, maybe under 6 months old, they can't run away. They can't flight. They can't physically fight back if they're in a dangerous situation. So they'll likely go into a freeze response. So when we go into freeze responses, it's often a very early kind of experience that we've had. So fight or flight responses really means our body feels under threat, and we then react in a way that we're used to. And maybe our parents argued all the time, and so we argue back, and we're used to that fight. Maybe our parents arguing caused us to shut up, so we run away and we go and leave the room, and that's a flight response. So it will depend on individuals. It could be the same scenario, and sisters, maybe even twins, will behave differently because that's what their body told them was right.
And then let's bring in the fawn. Do you have things to say about this notion that people pleasing has been categorized now as one of the symptoms of trauma?
Yeah, it's a kind of freeze. If you think of animals who roll over, you see two dogs in the playground and one just rolls over. It's gone into a submission. It's a state of, I will do what's right for you. So the fawn is to please another person because they're under threat, but it may be just a subtle kind of thing. They don't feel equal. And so they step down and they let the other take over. We really are that animalistic.
Yeah, and I can see, as you unpack this, I can see why it's such an important conversation as the feminine is awakening.
Yes.
Like we're having to deal with this trauma, and we talk about this in the course that you're offering, Transforming Trauma, that trauma is personal, it's also ancestral, and then it's also collective. So you can have experienced it, or your family line and can have experienced that. And also the one that I'm addressing at this moment is the collective feminine trauma of being in a culture for thousands of years that has not regarded the contribution that is uniquely feminine. The principles of the feminine have just not been regarded as important or as important. And that's even on the light side. On the heavy side, women, medicine women, witches, healers have been tortured and killed for their feminine gifts. So we carry that DNA. We carry that in our DNA. So yeah, speak a little bit about the 3 layers of trauma and why it's important, what you found is important as we start to awaken. Why do we need to do trauma work?
Well, when you say 3 layers, I'm seeing that as our individual experience from when we were birthed to now, the times in our lives which we haven't processed what was going on. And the second layer down there is what's come down through our family story, through our ancestors. And that could be certain beliefs. It could be certain behaviors. It could be ways that our ancestors dealt with a situation like a war or a removal, evacuation, this kind of thing. And that's brought stories which are verbally told, verbally communicated as beliefs, but also in a dysregulated nervous system. So if your grandparents were in the Blitz like mine, then they're going to bring a dysregulated nervous system to their children who were born after the war. And then that dysregulation then is part of the system of that child, which then as a parent brings it to their new children. So that comes through both in what's said, but also in the body and in how people respond to sounds or explosions or whatever. So if that's dysregulated and not dealt with, it gets passed on to the children. And this is our opportunity really to heal the next generation, because we're doing the work now. And the third level then is that collective. And we're seeing this awakening in women because we're starting to say, no, this isn't balanced. I want this to be equal. I want us to be able to be feminine and not have that shut down, as it has been for the last 2,000 or more years, where women's voice, women's intuition, women's power is not seen as equivalent to the male-dominated mind and science-driven society that we're in.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we're in this conversation. It's so incredibly important. And this is just a support because sometimes I think we don't really know what trauma is. So this conversation is intended to support you, the listener, to really unpack and look more deeply at some of the things that you're up against. When you said, let's bring in embodiment, because one of the things that you've said is that you said connecting mental health through the body opened me to the process of trusting my own self to heal. And so there's a famous book out, The Body Keeps the Score. When you're talking about that ancestor who was in a war, but the vestiges of that war are in my body. Wow. Like that is so intense. And so so now we're seeing trauma lives in the body. So when you said that statement of connecting mental health through the body, what did you mean by that? How do you become your own inner healer?
It gives me chills just you talking about this. I didn't realize this until I was, 15 years into being a therapist and a healer. Our body can heal. The mental health system says out there, oh, you've got these symptoms, now I'll help you cope with them. We can heal them. When we get to trauma, we're getting to the root. It's like finding that a virus that's in your skin, or the bacteria that's in your skin, and cleaning that out. When you cut your skin naturally heals. Our bodies want homeostasis. Our bodies want to feel safe. And I didn't really realize that. So embodiment is that process of being in the here and now and understanding what's happening now is in relation to your past experience and your now experience. And trauma healing is so beautiful because when you feel safe enough to put one foot in your past and know that you're here grounded now and having some strength in who you are, then you integrate that information, what was unprocessed and stuck in that hippocampus gets accessed by your adult knowledge now. And that's what the healing is. And that's how you rewire your brain.
That's so incredible that we've learned and that we have access to that wisdom that the body can heal itself. So let's talk about health. And right before we started filming, we were talking about the adverse childhood score and its ability to predict health issues. And I know that, I wrote this book, The Art of Turning 50. And I always say, like, once you enter midlife, you have to pay the piper. Your body then reveals to you your life story. So talk a little bit about, if you would, this connection between trauma and our health crises.
Well, the adverse childhood experiences study was done in the late 1980s. And up until that time, we really didn't see in a scientific way the correlation between what happened in our childhood and our physical and mental health as adults. And there were a large-scale study done with 17,000 people, and they were able to make sort of quick estimates, like 66% of women who have depression have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. And so instead of just saying, well, someone's got depression, it got passed on by their parents, or they were depressed, or they just had some innate problem, we can now link it directly to trauma. And we're also looking at diabetes, for instance. I mean, I didn't realize until I looked at this study that I just thought diabetes was a medical thing that, you can develop it because you ate the wrong diet, or it's just what's happening in the body. But actually, it's a response when your body is dysregulated this long, it starts to keep the score. It starts to build up the health problems. I've also worked with really complex trauma, and people's trauma from the past can actually come out in their bodies now. So if I've had some people who are working with particular traumas, and their body can start feeling sore. They can get things happening on their skin that are a repeat of what actually happened in the past. So our bodies are vastly complex. There are so many different correlations going on. And when we think about what's happening in us now, that's a problem. How can we drill down into it? What aspect of this is dysregulated in me? And how can I bring myself back into regulation?
We were talking also about arthritis. I think this is important to bring up because of what you shared around women who can experience arthritis in midlife or later. You would talk about a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's the most common time for arthritis to appear in the body is the woman's body after the children have left home. So that sort of late 50s, 60s, and 70s. A lot of women just think this is what happens naturally to our bodies because we've now at that age and we're a woman. That's not true. There is a correlation between what we've held on to in the past and how that's now coming out now as our body's going, I cannot do this anymore. So if you imagine what that woman of that age from the late 50s to late 60s, what are they going through? Their children have probably left home. They've been giving all their life. Maybe they got married and worked and gave and gave and gave. And now their children are gone. And they're now facing, well, who am I? What is my life about? I've been giving, giving, giving. And then maybe they give in their community, in their church, and they think they're good. I'm a good person. I'm giving all the time. But what are they giving from? If my life has all been about my children and giving to other people, where's the balance about it coming from me, about who I am and what my life is about? If it's always been about giving to the husband or somebody else, there's a disparity there. And I think this is where the arthritis comes in, because the body's gone, that's enough. I can't keep doing this. This is pain. I'm trying to wake you up.
And thank goddess the body does that, because it's such an interruption of a pattern that really is miserable. And maybe on some level, we don't know that we're miserable or that we've formed an identity around being miserable.
Yes.
So it's this moment, like we have this collective moment in time where we're becoming aware that there's more to our physical symptoms than meets the eye. That's what I'm hearing you say. And I think it's really implicating, as the feminine is here to evolve, we have to learn how to receive.
Yeah. And allow ourselves to be important.
Yeah.
I think that's the lesson we're teaching our generation to come. Like me, my children are learning this. I didn't have that as a child. So there's this ripple effect that's so exciting.
And it's not too late for you, for me, for anyone listening who finds themselves in midlife. It's not too late. In fact, it's really right now and here to do the work.
And our bodies know how.
That feels so comforting to me when you say that, that there's an innate intelligence that knows how.
Yeah.
So I think there's a sense that trauma, I'm just projecting what I imagine other people think about trauma. And that is that it's just, I don't want to do the work because it's too hard, or I'll feel bad, or I'll fall into an abyss and I won't be able to get out of that black hole, or I'll realize that something happened from my parents and I won't be able to forgive them and it'll ruin everything. And so talk a little bit about maybe the process of healing and coming back.
Hearing you say that, I recognize there's some layers in there. So a person saying those things, they may not say that to their partner. They wouldn't let their partner say those things to themselves. They wouldn't let their neighbor say those things to themselves. but they can say it to themselves. And I think this is the key, that when we look at that, then we can see that's an old story. I was saying that sort of belief when I was younger because I needed to say that to myself in order to protect myself. And it remains sort of true in that kind of nebulous way. We can't really put our finger on it, but I believe it to be true. But I wouldn't want anyone else to think that. And when we're doing that, that's a belief system where we were dysregulated in the past and we needed a belief to help us cope. And then we layer that in and it stays kind of in our neural network as a way of coping. And it gets kind of lost in that unconscious way. We don't really realize where it's come from. And that gives us the key to unpack that. When we bring that self-compassion in, when we bring that curiosity, I'm really saying this to myself. And then we're often afraid to do that because, like you say, going to trauma feels terrifying. But we would encourage someone else to do that if it was going to bring health. But for us, it's terrifying because it really was terrifying when we were back then. When we were in that traumatized place, we were terrified. And that belief comes through still. It's got that core to the trauma. And it becomes kind of mixed in. We're not sure. We kind of know it's not good because we wouldn't say it to our children or to our sister, but we say it to ourselves, and it gets lost because it's a story we've had for a long time and we haven't healed from that trauma.
I just love the way you say that. It feels like I want to cry because I'm just thinking how held I feel already, just even in an interview with you at the helm, you just as this embodiment of like a cosmic mother or divine mother saying, you can do this. It's okay. Your body was meant to process this. We just need to open it up and let it breathe, in other words. And what I heard you share was that when we connect that belief that it's going to be hard and it's going to ruin our lives or bring us down into an abyss or whatever it is that keeps us from doing the work, that's actually a thought that's intertwined with the trauma itself.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. I have never heard anyone say that. And yet that rings so true for me. So thank you for this compassion and this field of love that you really create through your work. I can feel it. Let's talk a little bit about transforming trauma, because people may be listening to this thinking, oh my goddess, that's me. I have that. I've been asking, how do I work with this? And you've created a way to start working with this through our course called Transforming Trauma. Would you like to share? And actually, I'm going to share the subtitle, The Feminine Path to Unleashing Your Innate Potential and Activating Your Inner Healer. And I really love that because it's framing the go forward. This is not being stuck in our wounds. This is, why do we do this? Because we want to transform it so that each and every sister listening to this can be the fullest expression of who she is on the planet. So tell us a little about the course, Claire. What will people experience and what process are you taking them through?
I'm really excited to share this course. This course has come from my clients. When my clients have come to me and they say, I don't understand what this symptom is or what's going on in me, I've come up with some framework or theory or some explanation that helps them go, oh, now I understand what's going on. So what runs through the 4 modules are the things that I've told all my clients. And they are the things that we need to understand to give us the confidence to go there. Because I say, you heal your own trauma. It's not the therapist who does the healing. We are designed to heal. It's our body, but we need to feel safe enough to go there. And we feel safe enough to go there when it makes sense to us. That soothes us enough to be able to go to those deeper places. So I explain in there, what is trauma? How do you understand what's going on? Well, what do you mean it's in our body? What does that actually mean? How can we understand when we're stepping out of a place where we can't process things? What's going on in that? Helping people understand the sort of depths of those states. So this is the information that's made sense to my clients over this last decade in understanding their own trauma. So they go away and go, oh, yeah, that seems more manageable. So this course is really that beginning stuff to understand what is trauma, how can I make those steps forward, how can I understand myself and what's going on.
And you have some practices too. So it's not just filling your mind and getting a context, which sounds absolutely vital to being safe. I love that you connected that. That's why we need information, to feel safe.
Exactly.
And then tell us a little bit about the practices so people can get a sense of how far they might be going in this 4-module course.
Yeah. So the first 3 modules each have an audio practice in them. And again, these are the practices that I would be giving my clients, because in order to be able to go to trauma, to have one foot in what really happened that feels terrifying, but to also remain here, you need to practice remaining here. And when you can practice remaining 1 foot grounded here, then it feels safe to go back and forth and actually regulate yourself. So the practices are about how to feel that good, beautiful, grounded sense of self. And I bring in trauma treatment understanding from that with bilateral music and some various techniques that my clients have found really, really helpful in that beginning state to feel safe enough to go there.
I love that. You know, when you were talking about the 1 foot here, so the way that we can resolve our past is by keeping 1 foot here.
Absolutely.
I was thinking about a lot of mystics. And so if you're listening to this and you find yourself a mystic or a channeler or a healer or a shaman, where you do really well in the other planes, what I have discovered, and this is in some of other research about nervous system patterns, is that pattern was also that's the gold of maybe even a trauma that happened that had you leave your body.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything about that? Because I think we might have a lot of mystics here who relate to leaving their bodies as part of their superpower, but also know that they get to be here now.
Yeah, it could be that you were trained to do that. That was your superpower, because if you could understand the bigger sort of dimensions happening in your parents fighting, then you could find that way in that made them soothe. Like, I look back at myself when I was 6, I used to walk up a hill and wait at the bus stop for my father to come home from work. Oh, isn't that cute? But it wasn't. If I could hold his hand on that 5-minute walk back home, I could make sure the family dynamic was going to be good that night. That weight on a little child, that looked empathetic, that looked good. Oh, what a lovely child. But actually, it's a role that I took on in order to protect myself and make life better. So when we leave our body, it's that same kind of thing. How is this a protective mechanism? And yeah, it might really help other people, but what effect is it having on you? Are you being your full self, able to go out there and do that work for other people? Is there something missing in your life now that you're avoiding or dissociating from when you're being in that superpower?
Yeah, I mean, I love that we are adding this into this conversation, because it's really, we're doing a lot of work and we have so much access now to the 5D realms. And with some of my very close friends who are like 5D, like mystics, teachers, shaman, guides, one of the things they struggle with is actually self-care of this body. And that's the very reason. And when I hear your story of walking up that hill, I'm so present to this paradox of how that made you who you are, because look, you are a total empathetic, loving healer. And at the same time, there's that wound. And we often say the wound is the thing that opens up the door to your sacred medicine. And here, what we're providing is an opportunity to actually have more integration. Wouldn't you say? How have you integrated that part of you that can kind of read the scene and put your love in the scene to soothe it? How have you integrated the other aspect of healing yourself?
Well, I can see a lot of that process. That 6-year-old walking up the hill is that I wasn't visible. My needs were not being met. So I learned to shut down and be invisible, to be this operating system to make things safe. And yeah, that's good. I got into a mind-centered psychotherapy. And then it got to a point when actually that wasn't okay for me anymore. I wanted to be able to go deeper. And I work now with my child parts through drawing. I draw them in pictures and they tell me about themselves in pictures. I self-soothe them. I connect to my emotions in pictures with the parts of me. And that is so healing, because I've got to a place where I can make those connections and it feels good. And I have some spiritual values that come in that can feed those parts of me. So it's very uplifting and very healing. There's a lot of work to be done still, but I have a process that I really enjoy and feels really good for me.
Yeah, I think that we all have a lot of work that needs to be done still. And it's not really about getting to an end. It's about really just peeling off all these layers to know ourselves and for more things to become possible. Because what I hear you share is that it's now a both and. Like, here you are being visible, and the gifts that trauma gave you as an empath and a healer are also there too. But it now is more balanced with you loving and receiving and declaring that you have a right to be visible.
Yes, thank you. That it is in the embodiment, because I wasn't safe in my body to be visible, and now I've learned I can let that go because it's safe to be visible now. That, I think, what you say about being in an embodied woman in these days, it's about being yourself here and now with everything that you've got, and that's that foot here that allows you to process what's happened in the past.
Thank you. Well, I feel like this has been really rich. Is there anything else that you would like to share that we didn't touch on that you think is important for awakened women?
The final thing is connection. If I could say what trauma is in one word, it's disconnection. It's disconnection from ourselves, from our body, from our soul, from our purpose. It's disconnection from others. It's disconnection from the land, from this earth. So when we get traumatized, we are in a place of fight or flight because we can't feel safe to be connected. And when we heal our trauma, we connect back to ourselves, we can connect to others more deeply, and we can connect to the land and the bigger picture. And so I think this is why awakened women are taking this journey, because they're feeling the disconnection and they're doing something about it.
Oh, I mean, that just gave me so much hope that us doing our work, it all comes back to this, like the willingness to do the work really has this incredible ripple effect on how we treat others and how we can get along. And that allows us to problem solve the things that we really need to be together to problem solve. And then bringing in Mother Gaia. I mean, I just had that aha experience of like, that's why we've been treating her the way we've been treating her, our collective trauma.
Yeah, we've allowed ourselves to be disconnected.
Thank you for presence and connection. So that's where we will leave this conversation, is connection. And maybe we can just like all together take this bow, just those of you listening, and Claire and I, there's no time and space. We see you, we witness you, and may all beings benefit from the merits of our efforts. Thank you. Thank you, Claire, for your wisdom and your beauty and your love.
It's a pleasure.